The Next CMO podcast explores topics that are on the minds of forward-thinking marketing leaders, from vision and strategy to leadership and emerging technologies. The Next CMO is sponsored by Planful, a platform to build, manage, and measure your marketing plan, track all your marketing spend, and connect your budget with outcomes to measure your ROI. Check it out at planful.com/marketing. Your CFO will love you for it. I'm your host, Scott Todaro, a 32-year marketing veteran, 7-time head of marketing, and co-author of the book, The Next CMO.
Hello, welcome everybody to the Next CMO podcast. It's super excited today because I have Nate Skinner with me, who's been a 7-time marketing leader. Nate actually has worked for companies you may have heard of: AWS, Amazon Web Services, maybe Oracle. Nate, interestingly, did 2 stints at Salesforce, but now today he's working for AffiniPay. And he's got an exciting journey here because he just started there. And I think one of the key things that a lot of CMOs struggle with is that first 90 days on the job. And so what I'd like to do is to turn it over to Nate, talk about why he joined the company, talk a little bit about how he's trying to align with the business goals that they've set for 2025, and really figure out how they're going to lay that out in a cohesive plan when he's only been there for about 4 months. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Nate. Tell us a little bit about AffiniPay and how you're approaching it.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Glad to be here. I had the opportunity for the first time in my career when I joined AffiniPay to actually create a full-time job, to find a full-time job, because the last company I was with on Fido, we exited to a strategic called Entrust, and that was a good outcome. And I went away in April or May. So it gave me the time to really focus on finding the next company that I was really excited about, which is a first for me. I've always gone from one place to another being recruited. And by the way, I love Salesforce. It really changed my life. I tell people this all the time, Scott. I feel like I got an MBA in product marketing being at Salesforce from 2009 to 14, when we went from one product to multi-product, from mostly US and North America to global, like up market, from SMB and mid-market. All that happened over those first 5 years, which is really kind of a great way to learn product marketing. So that being said, what led me to AffiniPay was looking at a lot of different companies. In fact, I was 23 different conversations I had that we, organically took themselves down. Either I decided no, or they decided no, equally, whatever. Ended up with a couple that really stood out. AffiniPay was my ultimate decision and choice, and I'm glad I'm here for really 3 reasons. One, the financial viability. This is a rule of 65 company. In today's market, post 2022, right? I was very focused on joining a company who knew how to grow responsibly and with financial kind of soundness. And so we're putting, margin to the bottom line, as well as we're growing on the top line, and we're doing it in a way that we can maintain. That was very interesting to me and very important as I looked at these companies. The second thing about AffiniPay was the people. Every single individual I spoke to throughout the process, just kind of, I'm a big fan of, advice to folks is like, join a team where you're not the smartest person. I was constantly amazed by how smart and capable all the people I met were. And I was like, I can learn from this person. I can learn from this person. I can learn from Drew, the CEO. So that was the second reason. And then the third was I understood the problem. And this goes back to kind of who is AffiniPay. We sell solutions to attorneys and accountants. And if you know any attorneys or accountants, my dad is one. When they're really good at practicing law, they're not really good at the business that they run. And so what AffiniPay does is help them run the business. We help attorneys and accountants run their business in a financially sound way and grow and acquire customers. We've been doing that for almost 20 years. Inc. 5000 named us one of the fastest growing companies in the country on their list 12 years in a row. So we continue to focus on this very specific audience of attorneys and accountants and helping them grow their firms. And I understood that problem. I was like, I get that. I know what that's like. And because I understand it, I can market it more effectively. And so those were the 3 reasons that AffiniPay was my first choice. And I'm glad they chose me.
Well, that's fantastic. So they have a set of goals if they're a company that is doing that well. And by the way, a lot of the marketing people out there that are aspiring to be CMOs, if you're looking to get your first job, one of the things that Nate brings up that's really important is that gone are the days where you just blowing money, right? There's a lot more fiscal responsibility now. and which really makes you focus on your budget and makes you align. And some of the things that Nate's going to talk about today that I think are really important is making sure that you're aligned with the company goals so that the money that you're spending is actually working really well. And one of the things that Nate brought up that he wanted to talk about today was also KPIs. But before we dovetail into that, let's talk a little bit about some of those company goals that you're dovetailing with, to make sure that you're working on the right things, your team is focused, and make sure that that's blending in with the KPIs are going to give the type of responsibility that hits your fiscal numbers.
Yeah, Scott, I think one of the things that's probably a good reminder is I spent the last couple of years going what I feels like going back to fundamentals and around this issue of financial growth or financially responsible growth. What you don't want to do is create a marketing strategy that's totally unrelated to the business strategy, right? Like I get this question sometimes like, well, what are you doing in marketing? Well, what we're doing in marketing is in service of what we're doing as a company so that they're dependent on each other. And actually, I'll bring back Benioff, the V2 MOM model that they have at Salesforce of visions, values, methods, obstacles, and metrics. That framework that they use to align that entire company is a very good one because it starts at the very top, right? Mark and the exec team describe the values and the vision for the company, and then they describe the top 5 or 7 methods, really like strategic initiatives that they're going to go after for the next year. And then everybody underneath that ladders down. Well, at AffiniPay, it's not any different. We don't use the V2 MOM framework, but it's the same thing. We have a strategy we've described for going out and getting our space, attacking our market, and growing our business. And we're going to do that across a number of initiatives, one of which is actually AI. Another is like, how are we looking at opportunities in the market around acquisition? Is there companies that we could take advantage of that are little tuck-ins that give us an edge or give us an advantage with our customers? And another one is customer obsession. How do we become the company that represents these customers in a way that they say, this is not a vendor I use, but this is a partner we depend on? So those are some of the initiatives. Well, then it's like, okay, well, what are we going to do in marketing to go get that? It becomes very straightforward, right? We don't have to wonder if we should go, selling staplers or should we try to go up market to large law firms. We know our business is SMB and mid-market legal professionals and CPA. Well, that's a finite universe. Let's figure out how we're going to grow them. Let's look at who we have today, what their retention is, which is high, how we maintain that, how we support that, and how we go find new companies. And so we need to do that in partnership with the business. And I think that's a what's the way of saying this the right way? It's a cliff you can fall off in marketing to go describe your strategy irrespective of what the company's objectives are. And usually the ones that you can influence and affect in marketing are related to growth, retention, and acquisition of new customers. And you mentioned this, Scott, earlier, like, a lot of the new world we're in post 2022 of like financially responsible growth affects CMOs. That's definitely true. But what I found is if you can make the business case for doing something that drives a 5, 10, or 12x return, most investment firms, definitely PE firms, your management team, they're going to be like, let's do that 100 times, right? Like, but if you can't do that, then don't be surprised when your programs get cut. And so that's where we spend a lot of time is describing this thing we're going to do is in service of this initiative. And oh, by the way, if we do it to this level, it will generate this outcome. And when we connect those dots for our team, we get unlocked and unleashed to go do our jobs very well.
This is becoming one of my favorite conversations because really the book, The Next CMO, this is what it's all based on. And the fact is that, you're looking at a set of goals and they're married to what the company's trying to accomplish. And you're looking at making sure that you're doing the right things and everybody has alignment on it. Now, the one thing that I tend to find, and unfortunately today, we're starting to see less and less of it, especially in B2B marketing. I think for the B2C marketing CMOs that attend these, it may be less of an issue. But I'm starting to see that a lot of CMOs don't fully understand their target audience. They don't understand the market. They're not doing any research. Focus groups are a thing of the past. Meeting with customers they get blocked because the sales team doesn't want them out there. Surveys, for some reason, they don't run them to get some quant. And as a result of it, they don't fully understand the buyer. And so when you talk about the goals and accomplishing the goals, when you don't have a firm understanding of who the buyer is and what they want, your marketing probably isn't going to work because you're just kind of throwing things up in the air. It's like a bunch of air balls that you're trying to get in the hoop. It's not going to happen. So I know that you do some of that work, Nate. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you is, what are some of the things you're looking at either implementing or have implemented in the past that you have found have worked exceptionally well for pulling in the data you need in order to educate your team on the buyer to make them more effective with the marketing and the messaging they're putting together?
Yeah, I agree with you. I see this way too often. It's back kind of that fundamentals thing. Like, how are you creating messaging and positioning about your company, your products, your solutions if you don't understand the way customers respond to those things? And it's outside in, not inside out. And so a lot of times, especially in tech, especially B2B tech, we have a bunch of smart people sitting around coming up with really creative things. We got a great product vision. We have a huge AI is going to change the world. Let's go get that done. And we haven't talked to a customer. And so it really starts with customers. I mean, we have metrics. You asked this question earlier, like key performance indicators and metrics we measure. One of them for us is customer conversations. And in the absence of a conversation, gong recordings or transcriptions of conversations with customers that tell us what they said, because the words they're using to describe their problem are the way they're describing the solution to their problem. That's the way we need to market. We can't say we've got widgets that do wadgets. Like, nobody understands what that is. What in our case, attorneys, a lot of them struggle with bookkeeping. Something as simple as Scott owes me $100 and it's related to case number A, and I need to relate his payment to that case. That seems like a simple problem, but many attorneys struggle with that kind of audit trail. Like, I get a payment and I don't know which case it's for, and so I send it over there and now I've got a pile of checks. It seems like a simple problem, but it's not. It's a very complex one when you have hundreds and hundreds of people paying and dozens of cases. We solved that problem. Now we need to talk about it that way, the way they describe the problem, right? And that is the essence of customer research. If you're not synthesizing what they're saying, the words they're using to describe their problems, then you're not marketing to them in a way that's going to be effective. Customers are really good at describing their problem. They are not good at all at describing your solution. They have no idea, right? I mean, our customers don't know that we do split billing where we can like take a bill and split it in two and have, they don't know that. We call it split billing. They call it, I've got two parties, I need to get paid, right? So you have to do it, and it has to be part of your core inputs that lead to outputs. If you're not building in the customer obsession and the customer conversation and the customer research in a real way, not a bunch of Google searches, not a bunch of Gemini searches, not a bunch of ChatGPT transcriptions, but actual customer conversations, then you're going to fail. And you won't know it till it's too late.
Now, to that point, because it's so difficult to fully understand the buyer when they're marketers, right? They're not, say, an attorney or an accountant. Is it important, do you think, as you're building out your team, is it important to put a subject matter expert on your team that has actually been an accountant or been an attorney or worked in a law office or something along those lines in order to help shape a lot of the messaging or help to understand the buyer create content?
%. I mean, we have those in our company, and Nikki Black is I say famous because I'm not an attorney, but every attorney I've ever met in this job knows her. So we have her, she's on our team, and she comes to our conversations around our planning and our strategy and our campaign creations. And she'll say, yeah, attorneys don't talk like that. Or, attorneys don't think that way. Or that's actually not a problem for attorneys, not any that I know. So she'll kind of represent a cohort of people. It's not a substitute, though, for talking to the actual humans, right? So she's a great representative of the cohort, but it doesn't mean we get a pass and we don't have to go talk to customers. We had an offsite called Wayfinder right after I joined, probably October. I joined in September, and we had a 4-customer panel. And I learned more in that 30-minute customer panel being here for about 60 days than I did in the previous 60 days about our customers. And like, it came to Q&A, and I was like, I had 99 questions. So there's no substitution for customer feedback and the voice of the customer. I quote a well-known industry positioning expert, April Dunford. I'm sure you've heard of her. Your audience definitely has. She wrote Obviously Awesome and the Sales Pitch. She's probably the industry go-to and positioning. And one thing she said was, we should be competitor aware and customer obsessed and not the other way around. And I could not agree with that more. I think we tend to think, oh, well, our competitors are doing this, our competitors are doing that, so we should this or we should that. It doesn't matter what they're doing. What are our customers asking us for? How are they talking about the problem? That's where we need to focus. And then we'll take a look at the competitive landscape and say, there's our opportunity.
Well, it's interesting because I actually think, and this is no slam on my other brethren in marketing, but I think a lot of people actually go to the competitor websites and actually steal some of the messaging. And the thing that bothers me the most on that is that the only way that you're successful is to differentiate. And the only way to differentiate is to fully understand your audience's problem, right? And build that product. And that's another thing that really bothers me about CMOs these days is they're not getting involved in product development, right? If you go out and you see over and over again, this is what our competition's doing, and I could literally take our offering and put it into their messaging, and it would be the exact same thing. How are we going to differentiate? Well, the only way to do that is to fully understand the market. And if the marketers are out there talking, like you said, gong calls or chorus calls, and they're seeing them in aggregate over and over again, and they're starting to pull some of those key elements out, that's a great thing to approach. So what other things for your team, as far as building out your team, I'm sure you're inheriting a team with the size of the company you're at right now, and the other companies you work for, you were not employee number one, so I'm assuming that you inherited a team there. How do you go about refining and shaping a team? And what are your key hires that you feel that you need to get into the mix in the early days in order to make the thing run?
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer the question, but also add a caveat at the beginning, which is every company is different. So what I hear a lot, especially when I went through my summer of full-time job, was finding a full-time job. I hear a lot of the people that I was being interviewed to replace had made a mistake. I was like, what mistake did they make? They kind of ran the same playbook. They brought their playbook from X company and went to B company and said, let me run that again. Or they went from, Salesforce to Oracle or Oracle to Salesforce. Let's run that again. You can't do that. And I've seen that 100 times. What you have to do is that experience you've created, that experience in my case that I've got, I get to bring to bear for every company I engage with in a unique way. It's like all the ingredients of this particular pie. This AffiniPay pie is going to taste a certain way. It's going to be a little different than on Fido and Salesforce and Oracle. But I've got all the ingredients. Now it's like a question of which ones do we need? And I just preface my answer by saying there is no you cannot rerun the same playbook. That's the fastest way to watch everybody run out the door. That being said, I have a kind of mechanism or a kind of framework I use, which is what is the company's strategy? What do we need to do? And then do we have the people and the capacity and the skills and the resources to do those things? And then marry them up. It's like almost like those, where you trace the line to the line and then you run out of lines. That's where I need to hire a blah or a blah or a blah. Or we've got a lot of lines up here and not nearly enough down here. For example, you might have a content issue. Like we have a content opportunity here around reaching our audience across all of our SKUs. We have products for immigration attorneys and personal injury attorneys and family practice law. We have got lots of different solutions for various types of law firms, but all of them represent a content opportunity. But we have very few content comparatively in size of shape of team, very few content folks. So we need more content people, right? Meanwhile, we have all those products and all those various solutions, and we only have like 3 or 4, when I got here, 3 or 4 product marketers. That's probably not enough. So you start to look at what do you need and what do you have, and then you blend them together and all the lines should connect. But I got to add this last bit. None of that should be done separate from the company strategy. What are we trying to do? Because if I came into AffiniPay and it was all about retention, we want to get, our retention rate to 104% net revenue retention, right? Like, let's say that was the goal. Then the skills and the team and the shape and the size would be very, very different than if it's about new customer acquisition, which would be very, very different than if it was like, we only have 20 enterprise companies in the world that we need to sell this to. Let's go get all 20 of them. That's a different thing too. So that's why I preface it by saying every company is different and you have to take the time in your first 90 days to understand the nuances, get into the details, understand what you're trying to do, and then start to execute your plan.
I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, like you, I've run marketing 7 times. All 7 times I've done it different ways. And it's because, the business, if you're an accountant, right? Accounting is kind of done the same way because if you get creative in accounting, you go to jail. But in marketing, you really have a blank slate. And what's filled with that blank slate is the research and the input that you pull in. So you were talking about the market research. You're talking about understanding the buyer. Those are the types of things that are going to shape exactly who you hire on your team and how do you go to market. So I love how you've approached this. So other things that people are talking about these days are all about what am I going to be doing with technology? And it's, we all talk to CMOs and like, well, how many technologies do you have running? Well, I got 62, right? And like half of them they're paying for, not even using. And so we talk about digital transformation. It's a term that's been around for a long time, probably about 7 or 8 years now, maybe even longer, as people try to move everything they have online for accessibility. Now the question is, what's the next wave, right? Where are we investing in technology? Are we investing in technology as much? Is AI now starting to be a dominant force in the way that we're going to go to market? What are you seeing on your end, Nate, with the experience that you have?
Yeah, so I have a pragmatic answer and a kind of future, our direction answer. The pragmatic answer is back to the point of fundamentals and financial viability. You don't have unlimited budget anymore. So this day of like add a widget because it does a thing and add another widget, and next thing you know, your program budget is blown on tech. We need to be thinking, what exactly does that do? And can it do something better than something else we've got? So our approach, my approach, is if we go to replace something, we should replace 2 things with one. Let's try, right? I don't know that we can, but let's look at all the stuff we've got. And if we're going to go buy something new, can we replace 2 things with that new thing? Because there's just so much out there, right? You see ChatGPT has Sora for video. Is it called Sora? Yeah, Sora for like AI generated video, right? You got Claude, you've got, what's this, Midjourney for content creative. You've got all these different technology layers, AI powered technology at our fingertips that literally 1 year ago, many of these did not exist. So today you inherit, like in my case, I inherited a stack of technology that was here before I got here. It's probably out of date. This thing is changing every month, every week. And so the one side of me says, well, upgrade all of it. And I'm a very passionate AI fan because I've seen what it can do for our velocity. Without adding a bunch of heads, without blowing the marketing budget, we can create massive velocity with AI powered technology. But there has to be people that know how to use it. We have to have a clear and well-defined objective for it. And ideally, it replaces at least 2 things we already have. And that probably is not something I should say to a CMO audience out there that's like probably a bunch of CMO friends of mine or at vendors that sell this stuff to each other. But the truth is, there's just no reason to have all these things when the technology is moving that quickly.
I can't agree with you more. I mean, so that kind of dovetails a little bit into the performance metrics that you mentioned at the beginning. And I'd like to kind of explore that with you because I think a lot of CMOs are still struggling with performance metrics. How do you get a team that has primarily been focused on some of those vanity upstream, up funnel metrics to focus on what the end goal for the company is and really make sure they're doing the right things to drive those numbers?
So Scott, what I remind my team about is the metrics that matter are the inputs that lead to an output. That's it. So in our case, in marketing, we care about traffic and leads and MQLs and SQLs and all of the traditional marketing funnel metrics, not because of them themselves, but because of the end that they mean, right? If we know historically, let's just for the sake of this conversation, 1,000 MQLs converts to, and to me, that's marketing qualified doesn't mean anything to anybody, but sales qualified does. And the board even cares about sales because it's qualified pipeline. This is like real opportunities that we've decided are worth working on, right? That's the definition. If you just boil it down, you forget the acronyms. If 1,000 MQLs leads to 500 SQLs, then we can do the reverse engineered math and say, how many do we need to get to 5,000, right? And so marketing needs to drive that, and we need to care about that because that's the input that leads to the output. Assuming no other changes, our win rate doesn't drop, we don't bloat it with a bunch of paid crap. If we do the right thing and drive a strategy that generates 10,000 MQLs, we will get 5,000 SQLs, and that is a meaningful change in our business. We care about the MQL, the board and everybody else cares about the SQL. And so we just need to remember that, right? And I think the golden rule here is, it's like when you show your homework. I've got 2 older kids. My son, who's going to hate me if he watches this, but he always got C's and B's, and he barely ever did the work. And he's long graduated high school now. But I always wanted to see the work because I didn't believe he was doing it, right? His grades showed that he got C's and kind of low B's, sometimes even worse. And so it required inspection. I want to see the work. My daughter, on the other hand, who's now a freshman in college, never got less than an A. I don't care what, she could have been out all night drinking freaking Bud Lights, right? It didn't matter to me because she got straight A's. I didn't need to see her work. That applies in our business. If we're blowing the numbers out of the sky and we're all on the upper right, trajectory, and there's all green arrows and no yellow and red, nobody cares about the inputs that lead to the outputs. Why we care so much in the last 3 to 5 years is because everybody cares, because the numbers aren't green. They're all yellow and red for almost everybody. And so that requires you to show your work, not just in marketing, but in sales, in product, in engineering, in CS. Every organization is responsible at this moment in time, and probably will be for the next 2 to 3 years, to show their work. And that's the only time when the marketing inputs, MQLs, leads, traffic, that's when it actually matters. In our board decks, we'll put that in the appendix, right? We have the work to show what we're driving. Now, for us, we're driving this kind of growth in a responsible way, so most of the arrows are starting to turn green. And for that reason, we don't have to show a lot of the work in the context of the conversation. But that's a long way of saying there's a reason people are looking for the things that nobody seems to care about, is because they want to see the work. They want to know that you've done it. You said it earlier, influence metrics or whatever, right? And if you don't understand how they're generated, then you shouldn't show those. You should not talk about them. But if you understand the drivers for MQLs, the drivers for traffic, the drivers for the conversion rates between those things, and ultimately the driver to pipeline that people care about in the sales, marketing, and leadership team and board level, then you should be prepared to talk about the work that you did to generate those. And otherwise, stop talking.
One of the things that I've been in over 40 board meetings in my career, and the one thing that I noticed over and over again earlier in my career is that when I presented some of those upstream metrics and the major initiatives that we set out, we accomplished, I got 2 reactions, right? I either got, the first reaction was total boredom. They totally checked out. I was basically talking to myself and a scared-looking CEO, sorry, while they're sitting hoping that I don't botch this in some capacity. And then I would leave the room and nobody would say anything, and it would just be like, oh, I guess I dodged a bullet. Then I realized with a little more engaged board that sometimes it turned into an ideation session. We're not sure that you're doing the right thing. Have you thought about doing this? Now, that's usually coming from a guy that spent his whole time in finance, and he sits on another board and he heard some other company saying it, and he's throwing it out to you. It has absolutely nothing to do with your industry or anything else along those lines. It's a total waste of time, but because it's a board member, you have to engage with it. One of the great things that I did in my career is I started tracking true ROI, right? Figuring out using your margin rate and everything else. And I was bold enough to go into a board meeting with just one slide. And it said, marketing, we completed the year, marketing created 3.65 gross margin adjusted ROI. Are there any questions? Now, here's the amazing thing that happened. Instead of boredom or being attacked or ideated on, literally I watched all the board members look at me and go, and then they turn to the CFO and they're like, hey, every time we give him $1, he gives us $3.65 back. Why aren't we giving him more money? Right? And that's when they became, the board, instead of becoming either a nothing burger for me or becoming a hindrance or a time waster, they actually became an accelerator. And that's where you need to get to, I think, overall. So this has been an awesome conversation, but I want to jump into one key question for you, because I think you have a great one here. Nate, if you had a CMO sitting in front of you or somebody that was aspiring to CMO, what is the best piece of advice or 2 pieces of advice that you think you could give that CMO to put them on the right track?
Yeah. I think that the days of sitting in some sort of ivory tower and like casting down upon people decisions is gone. I think we all know that. At least I hope we do. My advice to any aspiring CMO or CMO who's about to go do the second thing or the third thing is to get into the details. Take your time. Understand the problem at its root. There's a great book called Upstream. I forget who. I thought I might have it on my bookshelf. I think it's Dan and Chip Heath, but I could be wrong. But it talks about like tracing the core of a problem all the way to its source. And what that really tends to turn into in business is why. Always asking why. Well, but why? But why? You know, the conversion rate at this level to this level is 12%. Why? Well, you know, the product roadmap shipped, the product deadline slipped by 3 months. Why? Like, getting to the heart of why ultimately leads to gold. I mean, it's absolutely like where the rainbow ends. And we don't do that enough. We take a couple things people say and we move on, right? We're too busy to bother with the details. So my suggestion, and this was an Amazon principle that I love. It's they've got like 11 leadership principles, and one of them is dive deep. Leaders dive deep. And I believe that. I think that's the best advice I've ever gotten. Without getting it directly from a human being. I got lots of advice from lots of people, but that's one of my favorites because if you dig into the details, it's not micromanagement. It's an understanding that can let you focus on the things that really matter the most. Because getting distracted by a bunch of things over here doesn't necessarily drive an outcome. Like you said, what did you say, 3.5x ROI? If you want to get to that level, you better understand the homework that went into it. Because if you go into that board meeting and you say that and you're wrong, then you're never going to be able to do that again, right? But if you understand it and what drove that, and you're like, why aren't we giving this guy more money? And they give you another $1 million and you turn that into 3, now you're going to get unlimited budget, unlimited time. And that's where you want to be. But that requires a deep understanding of the details. And that's the advice I would offer. Get into the details. Not every single thing matters as equally, right? The prioritization is number one and number two is number two for a reason. But I could not emphasize enough, the best advice I've ever gotten, especially for new marketing leaders, is do not avoid understanding the problem at its core. And that usually requires getting into the details.
So I 100% agree with that, Nate. And in fact, usually for CMOs that are taking you their first job or they botched their first gig because they were focused on lead generation because some head of sales yelled at them on day one, and they started scrambling the jets to try to create leads without understanding the business. I always tell them there are 2 things you need to set straight before you even take the job. The first thing is you will have no impact for 6 months. Okay? Expect no changes or improvement for a full 6 months you're at the company. The second thing is that you're going to take 2 months to do a business audit, right? And that's the details. That's the point that you're talking about, Nate. Really understanding the business. You need to talk to customers. You need to talk to prospects. You need to talk to losses. You need to talk to industry analysts. You need to talk to all the stakeholders inside the company. You need to understand the dynamics of what's going on. You need to look at the numbers. You got to look at the strengths and weaknesses of the people on your team. And there's no way you can develop a plan without doing that, right? And so that's going to take you a minimum 60 days if you're diligent. Then you can start building a plan over the next 30 days based on what you found. And by the way, after you collect all that data, here's my big recommendation to you. Actually share it with the executive team. Sit down and run through it. All these people that are working at the company all these years, you will never have any more credibility than coming in for 2 months, organizing all the data, coming up with recommendations and sharing that with the executive team. They'll be like, whoa, this CMO is actually on top of things, because everybody thinks they know all this, but they're not thinking about it all the time. And when you organize it all together, because remember, you're supposed to be looking at the market. That is a big opportunity for you.
It's huge.
So you can get off on the right foot. And that's why I believe in everything that you said here today. So critical. Guys, you got to start with the goals. And the company goals. Build your KPIs off those company goals. Focus your team. Build out the people that are right people on the team. Just as Nate went through all of this, right? Look at how technology can help augment your team as opposed to it just being kind of a mainstay. We got to have it because everybody else has it. Another great point by Nate is don't look at your competition first. Start with your customer and understand that. Figure out your differentiation after. You want to have an understanding of what the needs are of your audience. Just really great points by Nate today. I want to thank you, Nate, for taking the time. It's been an amazing session. I think you hit on a lot of key points for everybody out there. Keep plugging along. Keep focused on the points that Nate made today. And I think you'll find yourself in a much better situation come December 31st of this year. So thanks again, Nate. And
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Appreciate it. It was great.
It was great having you on. And for those of you, go up to the Next CMO community, tons of content up there, templates and other things to help you get up and running and making your process a little bit easier. But look forward to seeing you on the next podcast, and hopefully, Nate, we'll have you on at another time.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks again.